Well, welcome Claire Agutter, Suzanne van Hove and Johann Botha. A very warm welcome today, Friday afternoon. And well, we are here together to celebrate that it was even already 3 years ago when we launched the first VeriSM book. And I can show it here, yes. 3 years ago, December 14, it was launched. Claire was responsible and involved in this whole project as a chief architect. Suzanne van Hove, lead author of both books, and Johann Botha, I think you were contributor and author in the first book, and later on, lead author for the second book. I myself had the pleasure to work with you all during all the years that we were busy with this VeriSM project, and yeah, in case you want to know more, because we only have like 10-15 minutes, in case you want to know more about the people involved, please check out our LinkedIn profiles and the www.verism.global website. But let us get started, because we wanted to take a moment now to look back a little bit, but also to answer some of the questions that we have heard the last 3 years. So, well, I would like to start with that. And the first one is, who could explain in like 3 sentences what VeriSM is? I have to tell you, there is a book. It explains it. There is a PowerPoint and it explain it. But let's try in 3 sentences. And I would like to hear an answer for someone that is coming out of an IT professional background, but also an answer more for someone that is working now in a business environment. So let's try.
For me, VeriSim is really although we laugh when we say we can't do it in 3 sentences, a fairly concise introduction to the topic of digital transformation and managing and providing good products and services within this new context. And it is not just written for IT professionals. The intent is that it should be used by anybody in business. Okay, sorry, that's not 3 sentences.
Okay.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good, Johann. I mean, I would say the same thing, and it's a concise reference. It's a model that can be adopted or adapted to an organization as they look to exploit technologies and really go digital. It talks from end to end, from strategy into the delivery of services and what you can do. And it's not written for the IT professional. It's written for the organization. And I think that's the biggest piece of what VeriSM is. It is uniquely written at an enterprise level.
Yeah, I think the strapline was, it's a service management approach for the digital age, and the big thing is it steps away from this idea of IT in the business and IT service management to a certain extent, because if your organization relies on digital products and services, it relies on technology to keep the business moving, you can't put the responsibility for that solely onto the IT department. So it's absolutely an enterprise approach. It's digital products, digital services, and that's really what makes it different, I think, to pretty much everything else that's out there.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. It was
short enough.
Short enough. Yeah, well done. Other question. The complete VeriSM library consists of 2 books. So the first one that was launched 3 years ago, which explains more the what is VeriSM, and the second one, Unwrapped and Applied, more about how to apply and how to work with VeriSM. Could you describe a bit more for which person or which job or which function or role you could say, well, the first book is really interesting and people could benefit of it, or the second book? So what are the target groups for, both books, or both books for each book?
For
is
me,
there a difference?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is a difference.
Yeah.
The first book was much more generic, and it was introducing the topic of digital transformation from a service management perspective, and saying this was the overarching idea to apply service management across the enterprise. And I think that idea had to percolate across the communities, and it got traction. And so we said, okay, now let's tell you what the model is really all about and how to use it. And I think the first half of Unwrapped and Applied, which Johann was responsible for, he did a brilliant job, because he looked at and focused on the strategic development of an organization, and providing so many different ways to look at strategy that an organization would immediately benefit. They could find the bits and bobs that they needed to create the strategy before jumping into the second half of the book, which was, the actual day-to-day details almost of how to design that product and service and how to support it. And then one last comment was, I think the second half of the book, with the management mesh, and because it's a model, the number one confusion is that VeriSM was a replacement, and it was never designed to be a replacement for anything. It was designed to get you to think at the upper echelons of product and service delivery in a digital space. And so it's use whatever management methodology you've ever wanted to use, what would ever be applicable and useful. And after that, it's a roll your own. So I think that was the beautiful part of the book. It didn't prescribe anything except for have a strategy. So yeah.
Yeah, we wrote the first book to answer the question, what does service management look like in the digital age? And we had so many contributors kind of sharing their experience. But then the question came back once the book was published, that, this is really good. How do I do it? And I think there's a real misconception at the moment that people don't want anything detailed. They just want high level ideas. And what we actually got asked for was detail. How? What do I do? What first? What next? And that was what we did in the second book, was so much more detail. Suzanne put in the amazing case study, and we walk through the case study so you can see the practical applications. And it does seem to be that level of content that resonates with the people who are reading it.
Yeah, I think for me also and you're quite right. I mean, the second book is much closer to a how to, but it is still a model. It's not a method. It doesn't prescribe. It says here's a bunch of things that you can do. And what I've sort of experienced the last 2 years or so is that people say, okay, I know I can do all of these, but which works best? So actually, people do want to be prescribed. I mean, if we told them there was one definitive way of doing it, they would have said, great, let's do that. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in real life.
Right.
Yeah, you need to be sensitive to the context in which you apply things.
And in case you had to advise someone that is just starting his first job, his or her first job, well, what would you advise? Where to start in?
First book. Easy.
Yeah.
The first book, because the first half of the first book, it was really talking about what does that digital age professional look like, and what skills are needed, and how do you manage the people side. It was the softer side of digital transformation, and I think those skills are so incredibly needed. And you just take the one idea is that, even if we stick within IT, you can't just be a single knowledge management specialist anymore. You have to know so much more, and you really have to understand the business process. So for a young person, understanding that first half of the book, of book one, incredibly important.
Yeah, that's why we also saw some students from universities that were interested in these topics. I think that's really great. Then I was also wondering, do you have any idea about what you think is the biggest accomplishment so far? Or
I'm going
the
to say it.
linguistic set,
I'm
yeah.
going to say it so you guys can
Yeah.
plug your ears or do whatever. I think the VeriSM authors and the architect and all of us collectively, we came up with an idea and a concept that has now been adopted or mimicked in other service management frameworks. And it's incredibly clear that that has happened. And, you know, even down to the language of some of the things. And so imitation is a great reward that we've done something really, really well and it resonates.
Yeah.
So I think that was incredibly huge to say, oh my gosh, we were on the right track.
Yeah.
And,
For
you know,
sure.
so
Yeah. And it's a community for me, because even with the size of the author group that we had and the global nature of the author group that we had, it's still a bubble to a certain extent. So now when I see people on LinkedIn, you know, posting badges to say they've passed an exam, talking about how they're using VeriSM, looking at VeriSM in countries all over the world, you know, places I've never been, that to me is just a privilege to start an idea running and then see it take on a life of its own.
I think for me the accomplishment is that I think we finally broke the mold of service management being an IT thing. I don't think we've achieved the level of conversation that we need to yet, but I'm starting to see it on a much broader scale. And what's really interesting for me is that the conversation in the Far East seems to be much broader than it is in the traditional backyard of service management. So Western Europe. And I find it really interesting and actually quite awesome that there's this this drive in a completely new setting that we're not used to.
Yeah, that's a nice one. Then I have a short quiz question to you regarding countries. In how many countries do you think there are VeriSM certified people that you can find? How many countries?
I'm going to say 30.
Okay.
Yeah, 20, 25.
Yeah, I'll just take the higher number. I'll go 35 or 31. Yeah.
Well, I checked
I think
this
it's closer to 50, isn't it?
57.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is 57. Yeah, that's really incredible.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That
if
is
you need a list for all the holidays later in next year or something, it's good inspiration. Yeah. Then a serious one again. What would you do differently if you would start all over again? What would you change or?
Hindsight is a perfect science, and hindsight doesn't give you insight.
Okay.
So I think if we changed anything, if we had to start from scratch again, there would just be other issues. So the best thing is to look forward and say, this is what we've done. Here are the gaps, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we could change anything. I mean, and Johann is exactly right. You don't get insight from hindsight, but I think back of when we were writing, and I sit here and I try to come up with new ideas or something different because, you know, we've all matured for 3 years since this first book has come out. And I'm not sure that I have new information that I would put in, quote unquote, my section that would be different. You know, so we still have to hit the soft side of people. We still have to hit, you know, an enterprise model. We still have to, you know, go out and embrace the disruptive technologies and the plethora of management, you know, methods that are out there. You know, I'm not sure that we could, you know, I'm not sure that we could. But I'm not saying that we're perfect, but I have a hard time thinking of what we missed, you know.
Yeah, there was one detailed question of Dennis that he put on the LinkedIn post as a comment. And it relates to this because he said, have you experienced elements within the VeriSM approach which require adjustments or addition? It's
can I maybe go for that? I think the answer is everything, because you need to adjust based on your context. Is there anything that I would have changed in terms of my contribution to VeriSM? Most probably not. Have we learned a hell of a lot in the last 3 years about digital transformation? And are we doing things differently in our own practice? Absolutely. And I think that's part of the journey. I mean, when we had this conversation 3 years ago, I said that if VeriSM looks the same in 5 years' time, then we failed. And for me, the application of VeriSM looks pretty different to what I did 3 years ago. Did the principles change? No. Did the structure change? No.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Anything to add, Claire, or shall I tell you another question that was posted on LinkedIn? Will you think about setting up a sort of transformation guidelines per type of organization or market segment? For example, government, health insurance, commercial. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think this is a community question, isn't it? And certainly what I observe from the VeriSM community and the people who are involved, the early adopters, they are very, very keen to share that knowledge and share the things that they've learned. So, you know, whether it's the case that we would go on and publish something formal, I think possibly not, because this is the bit of VeriSM that is continually evolving, that is changing. But the discussions online, the presentations, the blogs, that's the part of the VeriSM body of knowledge almost, where this type of information will circulate.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the ongoing VeriSM initiatives that includes things like, you know, having chats with closed communities, or, you know, our sort of VeriSM. I want to call it VeriSM days, but it's actually 2 days. You know, that we take groups of people from all over through the approach. I mean, the other day, when we had the chat with the guys from Tata, Sigrid asked David Barrow to share one of his experiences with a customer, and I was sitting there just gobsmacked, listening to, you know, how he's used VeriSM and the ideas in such a smart and intuitive way that I would have never dreamt of doing it. Yeah, I mean, so much so that I actually, you know, got some of my customers to set up chats with him, because I think he was much more sensitive to this difficulties thing and the conflict within the context that he was applying it than I could have ever dreamt to do. But
yeah, that's nice. Yeah, and it's always, well, maybe good for the audience to know that parts of, for example, how David worked with it, or Steve Leach or others, can be found on the website, because we have the recorded webinars there. So it's always good to check these out. Yeah, and then maybe referring to how David has explained how he applied it. Are there any other examples where you did see it work or applied, or that you have heard of that you can share?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can say names or companies. I didn't think of that prior to the question, but I know that I have personally gone back to this organization 2 years or 3 years in a row, speaking at their service management conference, where they have delivered. The first time I was there, I mentioned VeriSM and talked a little bit about it, and that resonated in that organization, and they jumped all over it. I came back the next year, and sure enough, they had set up a digital transformation effort and we're progressing. And so when I was there again, I'm talking about VeriSM one more time, and they're like, yeah, and this is what we did. And just like Johann has said, completely and totally stunned when people take the idea, and I'm like, wow, that is so cool. It's like, one, I gave you the foundation, which is great, but I'm like, what a great concept, and what a great outcome. And you just get very, very excited that, that there is benefit, and that folks are finding a way to use the core concepts in new and different ways that benefit the organization. And I think that is what's important. I don't think it can get any better than that. So,
yeah. I mean, we've had examples of organizations that we work with where some of the concepts is applied, where they've just had stunning ideas. I mean, we've run some or created sort of a pilot project for broad groups of the organization to start getting involved in innovation and coming up with new ideas and transforming old and stale products and services. And I mean, we measure the outcomes of these initiatives in real dollar value. And we started with 6 pilot projects, and it's in a large bank. And one of the pilot groups actually achieved, in 1 year's time, 2,787% return on investment.
wow.
Yeah, how do you argue with that?
Yeah.
You can't.
I wanted 3,000%, so you failed.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, of the 6 groups that we took through first, not one of them achieved less than 300% ROI. Yeah. So, and I don't think it's just saying VeriSM is wonderful, but it creates a new level of enthusiasm for people to engage with things that they've done in the organization before, and look at the environment in a new and a fresh way. Yeah, and so even they just facilitating that conversation is worth it.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, is that organizations today are now not being bogged down in just the details of technology. They're moving the discussion higher up the food chain and higher into the organization and the impact, and understanding the importance of products and services and the consumer and what else is out there. I think that's the discussion that is so very, very important, instead of process A goes into process B and gives you this procedure and nobody cares. Right. They just want the outcome that they're looking for. So,
yeah. And this year of all years is when we've seen forced digital transformation. So we're starting to get some inquiries now from companies that see the potential for the management mesh to put together almost a desired future state, because they had their operating model. This year things look completely different, but now they're starting to ask, what do we want to look like here in 3 years, in 5 years? How do we work towards that? And VeriSM gives you a very visual way to see that.
I just need to add, I mean, when organizations use the mesh, they mustn't use it in isolation. They must always use the enterprise portfolio with that. Because that gives you the strategic view, and enables you then to translate it into an operating mesh. So that's maybe one of the negatives that I've seen, is people are really fixated on the operational side, and they forget that it is driven by tactical and strategic decisions that happens first.
Right. Yeah. That's why they have to read the second book also from start to end. Yeah. And one question, I know the answer, but it's an interesting one, I think. So who came up with the idea of the management mesh?
Suzanne.
How did that start?
It started in our initial meeting we were in London. I think we were outside of Heathrow, and we were trying to come up with a model, and all of a sudden I had a picture in my head of, like a factory, and all dumping into a machine that was sorting out the bits and parts, and it had to have a filter. And
Okay.
so I came up and I said, oh, we need a mesh. That's what we need. And then I started thinking about fishing and everything else. And I'm like, gosh, if we just put the elements on this mesh and we can pull and open and close with what we need, we can then see what it is. And it never was about individual components, but because we were looking at resources and the environment and how do we manage, and technology was always last. And I think if there was one thing I would have done different on that mesh was to take out the dates and because we've dated ourselves, and and technology
Okay.
changes
Yeah.
so fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
savior was the word other, and I'm like, thank
Other.
you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah, that's how it came about. I drew a lot of
Okay.
pictures.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, but this is nice to know. It's background. Yeah. Um. Yeah. The last question, I think. Well, maybe another one. But where do you see also potential for VeriSM where it is not used or known at this moment?
I would say, rather than kind of VeriSM suddenly emerging in a particular industry, it's more about gradual growth, because the adoption and the growth has been, quite slow, quite measured, and certainly the perception I get from the people and the companies that I interact with is it is gradually building momentum. So my expectation is to see VeriSM continue, more stories leads to more adoption, leads to more case studies and more lessons to share, and that's kind of how I see it. And you mentioned students, the university module, the MBA module that I teach, we use VeriSM in there, so kind of incorporating that service management thinking from a very early stage in people's careers. That's again where I see VeriSM kind of sowing some seeds and leading to hope, better outcomes.
Nice.
This is a change. VeriSM is a big change, and I think change is using the old analogy, that battleship turning around. When you talk about service management, people immediately associate it with just IT. And then you talk about digital transformation, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're talking IT again. VeriSM is about the enterprise. It's about the entire organization. And so it needs to filter to the entire organization. And as more and more stories, as Claire said, get communicated across, various businesses, it's a change in a thought process of how you deliver what you deliver as an organization, whatever it is. And it's not up to just one element within that organization. So I can see why the growth has been slow and steady. And I can see why, because it does take to change that thought process, to develop or to adapt to a new thought process. And I think it is going to speed up, just because it makes so much sense. It's sensible, it's practical, and it's sensible. Yeah.
It makes so much sense. Yeah, that's a nice one. Is there anything that I did not ask during this short interview that you think, oh, maybe we should have had that question on the list?
Maybe a comment. When we started writing the second book, we realized that the portfolio was missing, because we talked about a lot of strategic stuff, but there wasn't a tool that we can manage that strategy with. And I just want to give kudos to Doug Tedder, because he actually went and we said, who's going to write something for us about portfolio management? And he came back with something that is so smart. Every time that I use it, I realize, wow, if you compare it with other approaches of portfolio management, this is so succinctly, so simple, so smartly to put together, and it links so beautifully to the mesh. So yeah, I think that's one of the unappreciated gems in the second book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. And it's one of the things that didn't make it on the mesh, but anytime that I've presented it, the catalog is your resource, and your environment is your portfolio, even though you see it in the diagrams of how we run through the model, that everything is focused around that portfolio. Doug did a brilliant job describing it. He really did, and it's so much worth reviewing that information, because it is critical. It is your strategic tool that allows you to make that decision. Because it does incorporate the entire organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I can't believe it's been 3 years, but it was. I think that the VeriSM piece is one of the most difficult things I have ever done, but also one of the most rewarding, and the people that I met through it. You know, I will know them for the rest of my life. You know, Suzanne, Johann, such respect for their giant brains. When Suzanne first introduced the management mesh concept, and I sat there going, no, don't get it. And it took me a while, but you know, the first book, Suzanne and I spent every Sunday hours and hours on Skype talking through the content, and then bringing Johann in for the third book as well, working as a team, all of the authors who contributed to it. It was just phenomenal, and it was, you know, I feel very lucky to have been part of it.
Okay, it's certainly a highlight. It's certainly a highlight of my career, you know.
So let's say cheers for the last 3 years and up to the next 2 years. I think the next 2 years will be a different phase, and with the steady growth will. So we will start. I'm going to really open. Ooh.
Oh, okay.
So
we were prepared.
I should have asked for an assistant for this.
You know what they say about people who drink alone, eh?
Yeah. I'm not alone. My dog here.
Luckily, it's late afternoon already where you are, so.
Lovely here. Yeah, because Suzanne, what do you have there?
This is actually a gin and tonic, but it's made with ink gin. So the gin starts out blue, and when you add the tonic, it turns pink. And so I thought it was very festive. It was the most festive thing I could come up with.
I even have pink gin downstairs. So
really?
Let's see how this goes.
Not near your laptop.
Yeah,
it's like we're all ducking.
Okay, the VeriSM books are there, so it's safe. Okay.
Oh, you did get it. Wow.
Woohoo.
Did that before, Sigrid.
Yeah, cheers for
guys. Absolute pleasure.
To next
guys, I just want to say, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you and to know you, and everybody else that's not on the call. I mean, we've made so many beautiful friends.
Really great.
Cheers.
Okay.
Team VeriSM.
Cheers. Yeah, Team VeriSM. The VeriSM Army, as we call it. Yes.